Privilege and an honor to speak to an august gathering. My name is Anirudha Choudhary. I am an assistant professor of law in KIIT School of Law, Bhubaneswar, Odisha. The topic which we'll be discussing today is a very contemporary topic. The topic is the Russia-Ukrainian conflict. The questions answered or the answers question. Well, before we begin the presentation, I would like to tell all of you a short story. A short story which categorically says the crux of the problem. I may be dramatical, I may be speaking facts, but sometimes facts are stranger than fiction. It was in 1989. The Berlin Wall was collapsing. As all of my students and participants know, communism was collapsing throughout the world. A young officer of the Soviet Secret Service KGB by the name of Vladimir Putin was stationed in Dresden, Germany. As he saw the fall of his beloved land, slowly but steadily, communism was collapsing under the weight of glasnost and perestroika, the policies of Mikhail Gorbachev. He saw an angry crowd of East Germans trying to get into the KGB headquarters in Dresden, Germany. They wanted to attack the officer stationed there. Coolly, Vladimir Putin comes out and says, look, if you attack us, there are a lot of KGB officers. We might retaliate and kill you back. Please leave. It is for your betterment. This is our zone of influence. The crowd did not know how to react, and most of them left. My friends and colleagues might be asking, is this actually a story? Yes, it is a story, but we do not know how authentic it is. It is from the sources of Vladimir Putin's autobiography. A young 35-year-old officer, Vladimir Putin of KGB, at that day promised that his beloved Russian land, the Russian Moscow, shall not tremble upon and fall because of the capitalist forces. 1991, Soviet Union disintegrates. The might of the Soviet Empire collapses. Vladimir Putin, a proud officer of the KGB, is rendered jobless. According to his own official accounts, he becomes a cab driver for the next 8 months while plotting the way as to why did the Soviet Union fall and how could the Russian might once again come back. 1999, Vladimir Putin comes to power. Well, this is not the plot of a Bollywood or a Hollywood movie, but indeed, it is a real-life story. A story which unfounds from the walls of Moscow, from the walls of Kremlin, where Vladimir Putin decided that Russia will not suffer the ignominy and the humiliation of the Soviet disintegration. Therefore, the process of rebuilding will starts. And in this, my dear friends, a key player is the country of Ukraine, a country which historically has been prized by the Soviet Empire. Since the last 1200 years, the Russian Empire, at the zenith of the Tsars, prided itself on the valleys of the Kiev and its oil-producing fields. They prided on the fact that they had a seaport called Sevastopol, which was a gateway to Black Sea, the gateway to the oil resources of the Soviet Union. But alas, when Ukraine became a separate country in 1991, as you can see, my dear friends, colleagues, and friends, the port of Sevastopol, and most importantly, the tactically strategic important area of Crimea goes to Ukraine. These are the portions which were pro Russian, including the Lugansk and the Donbas regions. Their population was sympathetic towards the Russians, but Western Ukraine, as you looked, was staunchly Ukrainian, wanted a separate identity, and had nothing to do with Russia. Well, this is all the basis of what I'm trying to say. A historical sweep will clearly bring into fold the fact that when Ukraine became an independent nation in 1991, when the ports of Sevastopol were taken over and Russia started emerging, they wanted the control of these regions. Well, this ideology of Russia also finds introduction in a lot of books, in a lot of concepts. The battle of capitalism versus socialism. The battle of democracy versus the battle of state markets. Why are we discussing all this fact? Is apart from being an actual fight, the war between Russia and Ukraine and the indirect conflict between US and Russia has its contours or its genesis from ancient times. And after 1945, when USA and USSR became two separate nations, USA followed the concept of capitalism, promoted a political organization called NATO. It had deep divisive clashes with the Soviet Union, which formed its own political organization called the Warsaw Pact, believed in a system of governance called communism. Indeed, after this time, when Russia and Ukraine became separate, Russia always wanted Ukraine as a buffer state, as a state which could live under Russian influence, which could work according to the fallacies of the Russians. A part of this was also because of the fact of the importance of the port of Sevastopol and a fact as to why it was critical to have a control over Lugansk and Donbas region. In this regard, you will also find, my dear friends, that the Russians had military troops in all these regions. Under this, the Russians had a tactical strategic friendship under which they were allowed to keep arms and ammunition in the port of Sevastopol. But all this started changing from 2010 onwards, when a person was called Viktor Yanukovych came to power. The conflict arose because of the fact that even though Viktor Yanukovych was pro-Russian, yet he wanted the support of European Union. In 2013, he goes to Europe, but does not sign the European Free Trade Area Agreement. Now, because of this, there were wide-scale protests in Ukraine. A part of protest, my dear friends, called the Euromaidan protest against the government. Now, Viktor Yanukovych flees away to Russia, it is alleged, and after which the Russian forces, angry at the fact that perhaps the NATO and the European Union were influential in driving away Yanukovych, stage a plot in eastern Ukraine, those parts which were pro-Russian. It was in February 2014 that this important province called Crimea was captured. It was captured by Russian forces. Of course, a lot of people say that no, it was not a capture, but the legislature of Crimea decided to join Ukraine. Obviously, it was a joke because so-called Russian elite peacekeeping forces had surrounded the Crimean parliament, and Russian forces were in Crimea and Sevastopol. Further, Russia said that it was giving the people of Crimea a right to self-determination. Why? Because most of the people there were of Russian origin. Of course, this decision was hotly contested. Russia was thrown out of the G8 group of countries It started getting a lot of heat from European countries. But I don't think Russia was bothered. Also for Indian students, this point is critical because in 2014, the Indian government and the Ministry of External Affairs played a very neutral stance. They did not support either Russia nor Ukraine, wanted dialogues to come in, which is now also the position of the Indian government officially. Next, what happens, guys, is slowly we'll be seeing the developments. There was the Minsk agreement of 2014-15. They wanted that this war should end. Talks and negotiations must happen, but it was not successful. Further, Russia wanted autonomy for the Donbas region. Russia also wanted an assurance from Ukraine they will not join NATO and would allow for pro-Russian forces to be stationed. Of course, the Ukrainian government did not want this. They wanted USA to step in. But the problem was USA was reeling because of its misadventures in Afghanistan. It was not in a position to interfere. And therefore, till now, this position of US still remains. Now, some of my friends might ask, sir, in Crimea, what provisions of international law were violated? Unfortunately, what happened was Russia at that time in 2014, please mark carefully, Russia at that time in 2014 had said that we are interfering as an act of humanitarian gesture in order to relieve the Russian population of Ukraine and Crimea from the torture of the Ukrainian government. But unfortunately, on the ground, there was nothing to suggest that such torture was happening. In fact, it was a clear-cut case that the so-called peacekeeping forces in Crimea in 2014 were actually Russian forces without their regular ensign and without their regular uniforms. That is why it could be presumed, my dear friends, beyond reasonable doubt, that Russia at that time had violated the territorial sovereignty of Ukraine, which was also the view of a political thinker and legal expert called Max Wheeler. Apart from that, United Nations has several conventions and treaties under which, if at all, countries have disputes, they have to solve it peacefully. Use of arms, the use of force should be the last resort. These are the relevant provisions of the UN Charter. Plus, even if, my dear friends, under Article 51 of the UN Charter, you are seeking to protect yourself as an act of self-defense, you must prove beyond reasonable doubt that there was an actual attack on your territory. But unfortunately, in the case of Crimea, Ukraine had not attacked Russia. Rather, Russian forces had entered illegally into Crimea and captured the strategically important port of Sevastopol and the province of Crimea. Since then, Crimea has been a part of Russia. The provinces of Donbas and Luhansk have been virtually self-independent, controlled by pro-Russian militias. Unfortunately, history has repeated itself. The problem is Russia took inferences from a lot of incidents of 1960s and 70s when USA and its allies had gone to other countries, had captured it in the garb of either humanitarian intervention or helping those countries for the right of self-determination. Further, another problem which we were now seeing in Russia was Russia was being controlled by a group of rich oligarchs, businessmen, who also controlled a lot of Russian GDP and also had a big say in Ukraine. For most of them, their point of interest was the port of Sevastopol, which was in Crimea, because most of Russia's oil and natural gas resources passed via Sevastopol. Even when Sevastopol was a part of Ukraine till 2014, there was an agreement between Russia and Ukraine that Russia will maintain a naval base in Sevastopol on the Black Sea. But obviously after 2014, they now have a permanent mission. Now from all this, it is very crystal clear that in 2022, the Russian forces invaded Ukraine only because of these underlying factors. In this, one big reason was also the fact that Russia felt threatened by NATO's advance in this area. Further, they wanted assurances from the NATO that they will not intervene. Second, they also wanted assurances that Ukraine will not join NATO. Frustrated by this, the Russian forces, in the garb of trying to give a lot of freedom to the provinces of Lugansk and Donbass, first declared them independent, and in the last week of February, invaded Ukraine on the plea that Russian minorities were being killed in mass, Ukrainian forces were trying to attack Russia, and as an act of self-defense, the Russian forces were retaliating back. Now, guys, if you can see this diagram, you will see the importance of why Russia is vital to entire Europe. Why does Europe not want to have an open confrontation with Europe? आप लोग देखिए यहाँ पे, there is an oil stream called the Nord Stream, which passes via Russia under the Black Sea from the Gulf of Finland into Germany. Now, one of the biggest concerns when Russia attacked Ukraine and the European wanted to slap sanctions on Russia, they were very cautious on the energy field. Only because of the fact that if Russian exports to European Union vis-a-vis for oil and natural gas stop, Europe might go dark. In fact, countries like Germany, the Netherlands, the Belgium are heavily dependent upon Russian gas exports. In fact, there was a proposal to build a second stream called the Nord Stream 2, joining Russia and Germany. That is now on hold. But friends, I have my own doubts as to till what time can Germany and the European Union keep up these efforts. Now, apart from this, why we are also discussing this fact is there are also economic interests which are at place. Russia is one of the largest trading partners of European Union. They import and export a lot of things to each other. Whether a protracted war will be for the benefit of which country or not is a very monumental question. Since the start of the war, we have also seen the increase in the prices of oil and natural gas, which is a big concern for the entire world. Obviously, in the last 1 month, close to 1 month, we have seen that the Russian forces have been continuously shelling Ukrainian cities, have been using smart bombs, supersonic missiles, and have also allegedly attacked hospitals and other sites protected under the Geneva Convention. But unfortunately, the problem is in times of casualties, there are 3 stories: your story, my story, and the story. Be it from the Russian side or the Ukrainian side, we are hearing their sides of story. We now have to wait for actually what is the story. Obviously, from this diagrams, you can also see that this war has also seen that inflation rates across Europe, Ukraine, and Russia has been rising. See, I'm not here cutting down the cost of manpower, and lives. This is a huge loss which is happening. Russia is blatantly violating the territorial sovereignty and integrity of Ukraine. But at the end of the day, as students of law and economics, we also have to look at the economic repercussions. From this, you can know that no side is winning, guys. Both the sides are suffering like anything. Apart from this, the European Union, since the start of the war, has denied the SWIFT access, because of which Russian payments are suffering. Russian banks cannot operate freely. Now, some of you might say, see, sir, this is not at all effective. This is not at all proving a deterrence. Well, this effect will be known in the long run. But as of now, because of the denial of access to the SWIFT system, yes, Russian economy is suffering. Apart from that, the sanctions which have been imposed by European Union countries are clearly hurting Russia. But more than that, Ukraine is getting hurt because of the loss of their natural resources and their infrastructure. Now, if you see the GDP growth during this time, you will see that the Russian economy was already going through a crisis. This war has further exacerbated it. Now, let me tell you one thing, guys. This war is beneficial not for Russia or for Ukraine. Please look at these economic indicators. The Russian economy has been suffering. It is on a downward slide. So therefore, any protracted war will only make it sure that Russian resources might go for a down spiraling. Apart from that, I will now talk about the Indo-Russian perspective. One point I've already spoken about. It is foolishness to expect that India will support Ukraine or India will support Russia openly. This is an unwritten norm that since 1950s, Soviet Union and now Russia has been the strongest ally of India. US has always maintained a dilly-dallying effect when it came to India. But India's friendship with Russia is permanent. Why am I telling this fact? It's because of the issue that in this so-called drawn-out negotiations, India and Russia will try to trade with each other as much as possible. So that apart from the friendship, the Russians do not feel the pinch of the war. Further, please remember that we are one of the largest importers of weapons from Russia. Traditionally, this has been the trend and it will not die down. That is why from all this, you will see that India has been maintaining a very neutral stance. Indian businesses have been coming out with caution while dealing with Russia. Yes, there have been issues, there have been problems, but more or less, Indian-Russian stance on this has been very clear. And of course, certain Western governments have also come out in favor of India. Now, guys, what is the way forward? Let me tell you one thing, guys. This war is a clear test of also United Nations credibility, the credibility of United Nations Security Council. We are seeing disturbing images from Mariupol, from other cities of Ukraine. I was shocked, my dear friends, when I saw the resistance of the Ukrainian fighters. Volodymyr Zelensky, who is actually a real-life comedian, is a hugely popular TV star, proved the fact that in order to survive, you need a lot of guts. He has been showing that. But there is an issue as to how much longer he can continue with this. There are talks and negotiations going on between the Russian and the Ukrainian government. But beyond one reasonable doubt, one area where I feel, which is my personal opinion, is a fact, where Ukraine floundered was its reliance on NATO. Per se, they should not have taken NATO's words and called for trouble with Russia. Recently, last but not the least, guys, there was a judgment of the ICJ in March 2022. Ukraine moved the ICJ against Russia, saying that Ukrainians are being falsely accused of committing genocide and of starting an illegal and illegitimate war. Therefore, Ukraine contended that Russia has violated its statutory norms and obligations under the Genocide Convention, to which both Russia and Ukraine are parties. Now, guys, under the Genocide Convention, please remember that when parties have disputes, the matter is automatically referred to the ICJ. Now, here what happened was the ICJ immediately ordered Russia to suspend its military operations in Ukraine and to end the war instantly. Because under Article 41 of the ICJ statute, an interim application had been made by Ukraine requesting ICJ to direct Russia to stop the conflict as soon as possible. Apart from the fact, my dear friends might be saying, sir, why do you think that the ICJ came up with the decision? There are three pronged factors. First, the court held that it had prima facie jurisdiction. Russia said that you have no jurisdiction. Court said that, see, Ukraine has invoked relevant provisions of the Genocide Convention. Both of you are signatories to the Genocide Convention. As per its provisions, if there are any problems on the substantial interpretation of a provision of law, the matter is automatically referred to the ICJ. You have agreed to it? Yes, we will hear the case. Further, the ICJ also held that Ukraine had a formal right of self-defense under Article 51, saying that Ukraine was attacked first. Ukraine's territorial sovereignty under Article 2, Clause 4 was violated, and therefore it had a right to strike back. Now, the problem is Russia has been accusing Ukraine of committing genocide in the Donetsk and the Luhansk region. Now, the problem is there is no substantial proof by Russia to show that indeed, quote unquote, there is a genocide going on in these areas for which Ukraine is liable. Neither there is any dispute under Article 9 of the Genocide Convention, because prima facie no evidence was ever given by Russia. Next, the ICJ also held that Ukraine was falsely accused of genocide. Of course, they did not say whether Russia was accused of genocide or whether Russia had knowingly targeted Ukrainian minorities in this area. But nonetheless, ICJ said that, see, Ukraine has a right to self-defense, and even though directly they did not say whether Russia had breached its provisions under the Genocide Convention, but from the wordings of the judgment, my dear friends, it is categorically clear that Russia had used illegal force in Ukraine, had sparingly and wrongly declared two provinces independent, and had interfered in the internal matters of Ukraine. My dear friends, please remember that under the Montevideo Convention, the four prerogatives of a state, the four ingredients of a state, one parameter is a state has a right to take its own external decisions. Whether Ukraine should join NATO, should join the Russian coalition, is totally upon it. Russian government, for me personally, cannot force it. Further, if you're blaming the Russian government or anyone, if the Russian government is blaming the Ukrainians for starting a so-called war or for genocide in Luhansk and the Donetsk region, they should have come out with proof, filed a case against concerned individuals in the International Criminal Court or in any other forum. The use of force, my dear friends, as of now, is unfortunately illegal under international law. At the end, I would like to conclude by saying that the world is at a crossroads. Russian forces are bombarding supersonic missiles every day on Ukraine. My dear friends, I'm shocked to say that in order to maintain peace and security, elite Russian Scorpion Spraska forces have entered into Ukraine, supported by Chechen militia. The Chechen militia allegedly has the sole aim of targeting Volodymyr Zelensky. Another clear-cut proof that by deploying non-state actors in Ukraine to target a legitimately elected government of Volodymyr Zelensky, Russia has violated Article 2, Clause 4 of the UN Charter and other substantial provisions of international law. Please remember, friends, that it is not too far when Ukraine and Russia should realize a fact that the war is to nobody's and will. It has to come to an end. No solution in the world was ever solved by problems or by wars. Here, I feel that the United Nations have to take a proactive step. I know that Russia is a member of the UN Security Council. Yes, it has vetoed substantial resolutions in this matter. But now the time is ripe when through diplomatic talks and negotiations, we have to come to a fruitful settlement. Because mark my words, I may be wrong, but in this platform, Anirudha Choudhary can challenge you by saying that if this war does not end in the next 3 months, we would be staring into a third world war, into a catastrophe, and into the day of the Armageddon and destruction. Thank you, friends, all of you. Have a nice day. If there are any questions or queries I can take up, please put it in the chat box, or you can directly ask me. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you so much, sir. Everyone, please ask their questions.
Anybody, Miss Abhilasha, do you have a question?
Sir, I have one simple question. What do you think is the future of India taking a neutral stance and abstaining from all the votes in the UN and in the international platforms? What is in it for India, and also in the way that China, being India's neighbor, is with Russia, and how does it affect the relations between India and China?
Well, very good question, Abhilasha. Abhilasha, I'll just go into a bit backward. If you remember, Vladimir Putin had come on an official visit to India in December 2021 to meet Narendra Modi. If I were a diplomat and an expert on international law, I could say and could presume beyond reasonable doubt that both the heads of the state would have spoken over this. If you remember, Vladimir Putin visited both India and China just before the conflict, sought both of their friendship, and surprisingly, 2 months after the state visit, the conflict in Ukraine starts. I'm very sure that our foreign office had an inkling of this. Why we need to have a neutral stance is because of the fact that we have trade relations with both USA and Russia. The problem is Russia is a much more stable partner than US. We have seen in the past that only after 2014 have US and India trade relations catched up, also on a political sphere. But be it rain, be it hay, Russia has always stood with India and vice versa. Further, we need Russia on our side to counter the Chinese hegemony in the region. Because if at all there is someone who can talk to the Chinese, can bring them to the negotiating tables, is not the Americans, not the Quad, not the Japanese, not the Australians, but the Russians. Therefore, for the time being, unfortunately, India is doing a very thin balancing act. It is between the devil and the deep sea. It cannot antagonize either Russia or USA. And that is why all the best to S. Jaishankar and his team of foreign experts who are doing a very perfectly balancing act. For how long is anybody's guess. Is there any other question I can take? Any other questions? Any other questions?
Subhashri, Manvendra, anyone?
Vishu, if you could be a bit loud, I think your voice is breaking. There was just one more question which has come in personally. I'll clear it up. Some of you have asked as to how effective can be the United Nations. This is one question which we have been debating for the last 75 years. Please remember, guys, that the United Nations was formed after the Second World War to prevent conflicts. But unfortunately, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, USA, UK, Russia, France, and China, enjoy a power called the veto power, which is an Achilles heel for the international community. Russia chose, Abhilasha, Anurag, Vidyut, and others, a very fine time to attack Ukraine when it had the presidency of the United Nations Security Council, so that substantively any resolution against it can be vetoed by Russia itself. There have been calls by many UN experts to deal off or to strike off the veto power, to go for an expansion of the UN Security Council, which is fine. You can expand. But the immediate problem, my dear friends, is how to resolve the dispute peacefully. I just hope that Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin leave apart the personal differences and egos, come to the negotiating tables to peacefully resolve these disputes. Thank you, guys. It was indeed a pleasure, honor, and privilege to be addressing you all. I really enjoyed this. I'm sure that I would be meeting you people very soon. I would like to thank Vishuraj Srivastav, the organizer of this webinar. Thank you all, guys. God bless you and hope to see you soon. Jai Hind,
Thank you so much,
namaskar.
sir. Thank you so much, sir. And thank you, every participants. And the certificates will be issued by their team as soon as possible on their respective mail ID.
Okay then. Thank you all of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So much, everyone. Thank you, sir.